you, Carl, to, a lay audience, how would you convince them that UFOs are real? Because this whole talk is kind of, predicated on that fact.
Well, thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure to be here and great to be here with Diana, and really excited about this event. So, yeah, we actually looked into this area, and so we're probably privy to a lot of information that's not publicly available. So, how can the rest of the folks out there maybe have some confidence that, there's some reality to this subject? So there's sort of three lines of evidence that you can look at. There's the first principles, there's sort of testimonial from people that are in positions to know, and then there's the data. So like if we're going to kind of run through those from first principles, the going in position is probably the laws of physics are the same here that they are everywhere else. And undoubtedly there's some exceptions, but in general, that's pretty much accepted by everybody. And so if you look at how quickly life evolved on our planet, the argument that's usually made is that life is uncommon and that faster than light travel is not possible. And both of these things really have no evidence for them. It's the exact opposite. So for instance, there are blue-green algae fossilized in stromatolites from 3.5 billion years ago. And recent scholarship has indicated that life may have evolved even earlier, 4.1 billion years ago. So the Earth itself is 5 billion years old. The crust has not even cooled by 4.1 billion years ago. So there's evidence that life evolved on Earth at the earliest possible time, even earlier than would be reasonably suspected. There's microbes that can live in outer space that we've determined are viable. And recently, as of maybe a month ago, people had identified microbes that were in stasis in 2 billion year old terrestrial rock that were brought back to life. So in essence, life is either evolving very quickly or some sort of panspermia situations going on. That's what all the evidence sort of suggests. If you look at the sun's what's called a population 1 star. There's 20 billion population 1 stars in the galaxy. The sun is like a relatively young population 1 star. There's stars that are like the sun that are 5 billion years older than the sun. So that's like a massive amount of time for other civilizations to potentially evolve on these other planets, and just statistically. So then you look at like faster than light travel, like can they get here? You don't even need that assumption, but Miguel Alcubierre, a Mexican postgraduate student, University of Mexico, in 1994, solved Einstein's equations for an effective faster than light mechanism. NASA's looked into this. There's no dispute that the solution is a valid solution. So it requires this thing called negative energy to work. Well, negative energy is a component of quantum mechanics. The Casimir effect, which was known in the 60s and demonstrated in the 90s, is evidence for the existence of negative energy. The expansion of the universe, which we've recently determined is accelerating, is due to something called dark energy. Dark energy is negative energy. So we've got an effective solution for Einstein's equations that requires negative energy, and we know negative energy exists. This isn't an engineering solution, but it is a theoretical solution. So it's very much disingenuous to suggest that life is uncommon and faster than light travel is possible. Both of those are false. So that's sort of the first principles argument once you kind of put that into the context of all the other evidence. So let's look at testimonial. Now, testimonial isn't hard scientific factual data, but then you've got to explain why people such as Barack Obama, Donald Trump all say that UFOs are real. They're in a position to have been briefed on this. You can look at the Admiral of the Fleet, Lord Hill Norton of the United Kingdom, former Minister of Defense Staff, has basically said UFOs are real. You can look at Haim Eshed, the father of the Israeli space program, that says non-human intelligence is real. You can look at Paul Hellyer, the former Minister of Defense for Canada, has said non-human intelligence is real. You can look at Chris Mellon, who's the first Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, for the progenitor for the Undersecretary for Intel and Security, has come out and said UFOs are real. You can look at David Grush, who just testified last year before the House Committee on Oversight to the effect that there is a government program looking into UFOs because they're real. And he was accompanied by 2 naval aviators that said the same thing. You can look at Lue Elizondo, who's a very famous UAP whistleblower. So, and there's many more of these. So that's sort of like the testimonial evidence. In fact, you can look at the legislation that was just submitted by Senator Schumer and Senator Rounds, and as well as Senator Rubio and Senator Gillibrand and several other of their colleagues last year, that basically said we need to look into this. The Congress is not being told the truth, and there's evidence that the government knows more than what they're saying about this topic. In fact, Senator Rounds and Senator Schumer had a colloquy to discuss this very topic and intended to reintroduce that legislation. And so then you can look at the data. We've got videos, what they call colloquially the FLIR, the gimbal, the go fast video, that show unidentified flying objects that the Pentagon has asserted are not ours and are not our adversaries. And they date from events that happened in 2004 and 2015. You can look at the experience of Gordon Cooper, one of America's first Mercury 7 astronauts who chased UFOs in 1951 over West Germany, and had testified before the United Nations in 1979 to that fact. You can look at the incursions over the northern U.S. Ballistic Missile Early Warning System in the 70s, where radars were picking up UFOs. And then you can look at, in the 1960s, the readiness status change of our ICBMs at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where missiles were taken offline. And then in the Soviet Union, an analogous thing where missiles were brought online, and there are FOIA documents and testimony to the reality of that. There's an agreement between the former Soviet Union and the United States that's still in force, intending to reduce the threat of nuclear war, where there's a stipulation that either side will notify the other if UFOs impact their missile early warning systems. So people say, well, if this is real, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? Well, in 1952, the radar visual sightings over Washington, D.C. for 2 weekends, including air-to-air intercepts, that precipitated the largest press conference since World War II up to that time. And so people say, well, okay, why don't they just land in the middle of the day? And that's happened in 1994 in Rua, Zimbabwe, where craft landed and beings presented themselves to elementary school-age children in the middle of the day. That almost similar, identical incident happened in 1966 in Westall, Australia. There's a concerted correlation between UFO or UAP activity and nuclear sites. The Pantac site in Texas and the Hanford plutonium production facility have numerous UFO sightings and correlations. And in fact, this extends to overseas sites. Even the Fukushima incident had correlations. So looking at the evidence, both from the standpoint of first principles, from the standpoint of people who would know, and from factual information, it's indisputable that this is a real phenomenon.